Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Across the Sky, our Lee Enterprises weather podcast. I'm Matt Hollander, covering weather for all of Lee's Midwest websites, apps, and social media accounts from Chicago. And I'm joined by my fellow meteorologist, Joe Martucci, with the Press of Atlantic City in New Jersey. Apparently, it's vacation season for the Lee weather team. We're short two members today, Sean Sublett in Richmond, Virginia, and Kirsten Lang in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They'll both be back next week, though. And speaking of vacations, Joe, you just got back from a big vacation. So how was Italy?
Yeah, thanks. I was in Italy and Malta for just a shade under 2 weeks. It was great. It was my third time in Italy. We have family in Italy. So, we go there. It's always great because we eat a lot. We hang out a lot. I don't spend a lot. And hanging out with friends and family was good. It was a special time in particular because a little backstory. My mom was born in Italy, and my mom's parents, of course, they took a boat over here back in the day. But they're from this little village called Monteferrante, which you can look it up on Google, and there is a Wikipedia page with one sentence on it, Matt. But anyway, when we went there, all of the cousins who were about my age were there. We've never really had that before out of all the times we've all gone. So it was really nice to be in the village. My nonna, my grandma was there as well. She actually just landed a couple of days ago. She was there with my mom for about 3 weeks. This place is interesting, Matt. It's a seasonal place, but it goes from about 100 people year round to about 1,000. But it's not even for the summer. It's just literally for about 4 weeks, from about last week of July to just about the third week in August. The bar opens for this 4 weeks. There's no restaurant. There's no doctor. There's no police. There's no fire. I can keep going, but there is a cheese person who comes twice a week. Anyway, it was
That's
a good
the most
time.
important, the cheese person.
That is the most important thing. Not good for my cholesterol, but good for my stomach. So we had a really nice time, and Malta's a cool place too. I definitely, if you have the opportunity, take it, Matt. And actually, I got the, we'll say, pleasure of flying Ryanair for the first time. The infamous Ryanair.
I just, recently heard about them. I have not had a chance to partake in Ryanair.
It's known as the spirit of Europe, but I have to say it was very clean, and we got there safely, so that was the important part.
That's all that matters. I was in Italy once in high school. I took a trip during spring break. Junior year of high school, and we saw the big highlights in Italy. Went to Florence and Venice and Rome, and it was just an awesome trip, one of my best trips ever. Love Italy, definitely want to go back. That sounds like you had an awesome time. It's hard probably to come back from a trip like that.
It was, but it is good to be back. Unfortunately, I actually came down with a case of COVID on the way back as well. Thankfully, minor case. But good to be back, good to be healthy again. And I'm just excited for what we have going on, Matt. We got a lot of good things going on in our Lee weather team. Anyway, maybe enough about us.
Yeah, well, glad you're feeling better, Joe. Glad you're back in the U.S. Switching gears, severe weather season may be winding down, but we're still in the thick of flood season. And we have seen plenty of it across the country lately. So flooding is the subject of today's episode. And fortunately, we've got the perfect person to help us tackle this, Dr. Rosimar Rios-Berrios. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, she earned her bachelor's degree in theoretical physics from the University of Puerto Rico, and then came to the United States, where she earned her PhD in atmospheric sciences from the State University of New York at Albany. She's now a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. Her research focuses on high-impact weather, especially tropical cyclones, numerical weather prediction, and precipitation extremes. She's also a member of Science Moms, an organization of climate scientists and mothers who are helping other moms better understand climate change. Rosimar, welcome to Across the Sky.
Thank you very much for having me.
Glad to have you here. And so to start things off, the question we like to ask all our guests on the show: what got you interested in weather, and how'd you get to the position you're in today?
Sure. So I would say that almost every meteorologist has a weather event that they always remember, and that is almost always a reason why they got interested in studying weather. For me, it was more like a sequence of weather events. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, as you said. And when people ask me, where is Puerto Rico? I like to say two things. One, it is in the Caribbean. Second, it is in the middle of Hurricane Highway, meaning that many, many hurricanes come by either to the north, to the south, or right through the island. So growing up in Puerto Rico, I had many, many encounters with either tropical cyclones that came through the island or tropical cyclones that were just about to come through, but either decided to go south or north. And in either scenario, there was always so much uncertainty, and that's what I always remember. The question we always had was, is it going to come or not? Is the tropical cyclone going to go through Puerto Rico or not? And even if it's not going to go by directly, are we going to have any winds, any rain, any other effects from the tropical cyclones? And so I thought, why can't we say this for sure? I want to become a meteorologist, stand there in front of the camera and give people the perfect weather forecast. Because in my naiveness, that's what I thought I should do. Of course, as I started my studies first in physics in Puerto Rico, because we don't have an official degree in meteorology, we have the equivalent of a minor in Puerto Rico. I started to realize how complex the science of weather prediction is. And I started doing summer internships, and most summer internships are research focused. So I started studying prediction of tropical cyclones in particular, using numerical weather predictions models. And I realized that it's so much more complex than just standing in front of a camera and giving a weather forecast. I mean, all my respect for the people that do that, because it's really, really difficult. But going through that experience then made me realize that I wanted to be the person behind the camera, not the person in front of the camera. I wanted to be doing the work behind the scenes, trying to improve our weather forecast, trying to improve especially the prediction of tropical cyclones. So that's how I got interested in pursuing what is more of a research meteorologist track rather than a weather forecaster track. So that's what got me into then going into graduate school, getting a PhD in atmospheric sciences, and following on onto the position in which I am now, which is a scientist position, or as I like to call it, a research meteorologist position, in which I spend most of my days trying to find ways to better understand our atmosphere and better predict weather events.
You bring up a story I think is familiar to a lot of us if you're a meteorologist, where you go in and you go into college and you think that weather forecasting is the primary way to go, and maybe working in media. I knew friends who had that track, and then they said, it's something else interests me within weather, and then they went on, and like you said, you went into research. I know people went into economics, the military, etc. But my question for you is, was it mentally hard to make that transition to, something I thought, I specifically thought I was going to forecast for so long in my life, and now I'm interested in something else? Was that a hard transition mentally to make, or were you just ready? You're like, you know what? I like this so much better. I want to get into this.
It was more of the latter. So it was not too hard because I got to try the broadcast meteorologist part through activities that we had at the American Meteorological Society chapter at my university, at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. We had a little chroma TV, not a TV, right? We had the chroma, which is the green background. We had a camera, etc. I got to try it a little bit, and I realized this is not for me. It's very, very difficult. And I think I have a natural or an innate interest for computer coding, and also kind of like doing math and solving issues. So the part of dedicating like my career to research wasn't too hard of a transition, but it was very, very eye-opening to go through my education and realize, meteorology is way more than just saying it's going to rain or not, it's going to be hot or not. There is so much more that goes into what makes the final product, which is the weather forecast that we get either on TV, on our phones, on the newspaper. That was a very eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, there's so many behind the scenes of meteorologists, and we try and bring them on the podcast because I think a lot of people aren't aware how many other meteorologists are out there that aren't on TV aren't doing digital forecasts like we are, but a whole bunch of people are doing stuff behind the scenes. So to switch gears a little bit and get back to flooding, because there has just been so much. I mean, just over the last couple months, I mean, it has been one place after another. Dallas, St. Louis, Eastern Kentucky. And the thing that blew my mind, there was even flooding in Death Valley of all places. So just based on the headlines, it seems like flooding is just becoming more common and honestly more extreme. I mean, these are record-breaking events. But is there any hard data to back this up? All these headlines, are we really seeing more flooding, and is it really getting more extreme?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. We're seeing not only an increase in the amount of flooding events, but we're also seeing an increase in the amount of rain that falls from the storms, how hard it rains, which is the rainfall intensity. Our climate projections agree that as the atmosphere continues to warm, if we don't do something to slow it down or stop it, our atmosphere can hold more water vapor. And that is just an ingredient that can contribute to more flash floods in more flooding events, not only in the United States, but also around the world. We also saw historic rainfalls in South Korea and India just recently. But think about it like baking recipe, right? You need ingredients, but you also need the steps. So the ingredients, unfortunately, yes, they are getting there. Our atmosphere is warming up. The atmosphere can hold more water vapor. Then comes the processes, the steps, and that's the storms that produce the rainfall. And there are many studies that are showing that as the climate continues to warm, we may see more of those storms, the so-called mesoscale convective systems, or other storms that can use that amount of water vapor and translate it into heavy rainfall. And as that heavy rainfall falls into our rivers, into our streets, then it can continue to produce many flash flood events. So in short, unfortunately, yes, the data is there suggesting that as the atmosphere continues to warm, we may continue to see more flash flood events in the United States and around the world.
I was going to wait to ask this question until a little bit later, but now that we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this, how do you feel about talking about these events in terms of putting them in context? We had in Dallas, Fort Worth, the week of this week, which is August 22nd, something called a 1 in 1,000 year flood event. We had here in New Jersey that I cover in Long Beach Island, we had 2.16 inches of rain in 15 minutes. That is, I saw your eyes perk up when you said that. Mm-hmm. I mean, incredible. I mean, more than a 1 in 1,000 year event. However, my opinion is that we're using this so often, it might be crying wolf. Is there a better way to put these in context in terms of the changing climate that we have? What would you do?
That's a really good question, and one that's very difficult to answer. There is a whole team of many teams of people trying to get at these questions, right? But in short, for me, I like to think about it as essentially a distribution. I like to think a lot about statistics and mathematics. And so what might be considered an extreme today, something that rarely happens today, maybe something a lot more common in the future. So hopefully that kind of message puts it into a context, like what perhaps my parents experience once in their lifetime, maybe my children will experience it 5 times, 10 times. That's the way I would put it into context.
Yeah, because it just does seem that the frequency is just going up and up, and using these terms like once every 500 years, once every 1,000 years is kind of, giving people a sense of, a false sense of security too, because it honestly is probably going to be sooner than 500 or 1,000 years that these kind of flood events are going to happen again unfortunately, with the climate change and what's going on there.
So and while I'm here with you, I might as well ask, what I did for this event was I said, there was a less than 0.1% chance of that event happening in any given year. How do you like that? Is that a good way to go?
I like that, but I have passion for mathematics and I
Right.
can interpret how that happens.
Okay.
My worry with that is that I'm not sure that the layperson out there who's thinking in terms of like, what is it going to happen in the next 5-10 years? I'm not sure if they would like to think in terms of those percentages.
Okay.
Well,
we'll see what the people say. I put that in an article a couple of days ago.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to the chance of rain too, and the confusion when it comes to percentages. And yeah, it is a struggle to try and communicate, the frequency of this and the chance of something happening. But talking about that a little bit, what are some of the climate models indicating about the future of flood events? Do they have any indication about how the frequency is going to change as we go forward in time? Now, I'm sure there's going to be some fluctuation depending on the model and depending on what warming scenario occurs and how quickly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But what are kind of some of the climate models hinting at as far as the future of flooding events?
Yeah, that's correct. So there are many factors that go into answering this question. And one factor to consider is what kind of tool we're using, right? So for the longest time, we've been using these so-called global circulation models or GCMs. They are very, very powerful climate models. They don't only include what happens in the atmosphere, but they also include what happens over land, over ocean, sea ice, etc. And those climate models, even though they are very powerful, unfortunately, they lack the level of detail that we know to say for sure how much flooding we're going to get, for example, in the Midwest in the future. However, there is a new family of computer models. They are so-called convection permitted models. They have much finer details. They are able to see the atmosphere with a lot more finer details. And based on those models with a lot more finer details, we are seeing that in a high-end warming scenarios, the US may become a lot more prone to flash floods. And for those of you who like numbers, we may see a 17 to 20% increase in flash flood events in the future. And this is especially true for the Mississippi River Basin, especially for the lower Mississippi River Basin, that's including the Gulf states, Louisiana, also going up towards, going north towards Mississippi, because these events are also undoubtedly influenced by landfalling tropical cyclones. And landfalling tropical cyclones bring a lot of rain. Let's not forget Hurricane Harvey in Texas, Hurricane Florence in the Carolinas. So that's what the computer models are showing. That's what our scientists are concluding, that in a high-end warming scenario, we may see somewhere between 17 to 20% increase in flash flood producing storms, especially in the Mississippi River Basin and also in California as well.
And it's interesting that 17 to 20%, because flooding is associated with such a high fatality of deaths. It's one of the big weather related killers. On average, just the number of people that die in flooding, it doesn't get the headlines that when a hurricane makes landfall so much, or when a big tornado happens to go through a city. But there are just so many deaths associated with people driving into flooded roads. And so the fact that we're talking about an increase of flooding, that's first just the property damage associated with that, but also how the risk for a life that's associated with that if the proper messaging doesn't get out, especially how quickly these flooding events can occur. People can not get out of an area in enough time. So it's a serious situation. And that's why we're talking about it. We're going to take a short break right now, though, but we will continue our flooding conversation on the other side and also discuss the cool Science Moms initiative. So stick around, more Across the Sky right after this break. Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Dr. Rosimar Rios-Berrios talking all things flooding. And when we're talking about flooding, it's not just from thunderstorm flooding. We haven't dealt with it yet this season, but we're also getting into the peak of hurricane season. So we got to talk about flooding associated with tropical cyclones as well. And Rosimar, what are you seeing when it comes to hurricanes and tropical storms? Is the amount of rainfall associated with those going up? Is the amount of flooding, especially inland flooding associated with tropical storms and hurricanes, going up?
Unfortunately, that's true. Yes. This is where most of the climate models agree. in terms of what changes we might see in the future if we continue to see a warming climate scenario as we're seeing up to now. So there's a lot of questions about, are we going to see more storms? Are we going to see more intense hurricanes? Are we going to see more hurricanes coming to the US, etc.? Like, there's a lot of uncertainty there, but somewhere where most scientists agree and most climate models agree is that as our climate continues to warm, we may continue to see more rainfall associated with tropical cyclones. And there are several reasons for why. So to get into those reasons, let's talk first about like, why do tropical cyclones produce so much rain? And one of the reasons is that the strong winds, right, they can like stir the ocean, put a lot of water vapor into the atmosphere. And as the tropical cyclone heads inland, then a lot of that water vapor can fall into where the tropical cyclone makes landfall. But there are many other like small scale factors that go into play as well. But if you think about it, then like if the tropical cyclone is like taking water from the ocean essentially and putting it into clouds and rain, if our oceans are warmer, if the atmosphere is warmer, then that means that it can hold a lot more water vapor and then it can bring it inland. And unfortunately, what many people don't know is that water, not wind, is the leading cause of fatalities in the United States associated with tropical cyclones. And when I say water, it's not only water from flash flood, it's also water from storm surge. And that's another factor that may influence what we may see in the future associated with like flooding from tropical cyclones, right? Because as the storm surge happens, we may get inland inundation due to that storm surge, which is that water from the ocean that gets pushed inland by the winds of the tropical cyclones.
One question I have, and if you can explain to the audience, a lot of time when you talk about storm surge, we're saying water above normally dry ground. What is normally dry ground?
That's a good question that I admittedly am not like an expert on. So I don't want to give you an answer right now.
No, that's okay. And that's why I'm glad I brought up the question, because a lot I hear it myself, right? Mm-hmm. Above normally dry ground. Is it the beach? Is it the dunes over the beach? Did it have anything to do with that? Because that matters for people if you live along the barrier islands. But I guess I can pivot and say, this, when we're talking about tropical cyclones and storm surge here, how often are we seeing storm surge get into these areas now that didn't usually flood? What is the, I guess with sea level rise that we're seeing across the area, how much is this extra storm surge we're seeing a factor of, hey, we have these sea level risings, or is it more of a factor of more people are just living along the coast?
I think there is a factor of both. We're definitely seeing a lot of population increases, unfortunately, near the coast of Florida, barrier islands, along the Carolinas, etc. So definitely population growth it's a factor. But the other true factor is that as the sea level rises, that means that there's more water that can be pushed inland if you put the same winds, right? So take a storm today of winds of about, I don't know, let's say 60 miles per hour. Not that much, but that's as fast as you would go in the highway, right? Take a storm with the same winds, 60 miles per hour in the future, but you have several feet more water in the ocean. There is a lot more water that can be pushed inland by the same strength of the winds. So there is a combination of both, the amount of people that are moving to the coast as well as the sea level rise.
Yeah, and this is going to be just kind of like a little bit of an open discussion, I think, because if we know that flooding is going to become more common, and with sea level rise, we're probably going to see flooding in more locations that have never flooded before. I'm just wondering, what can be done to really mitigate the impacts from these extreme flooding events? Like, what can we do? I mean, besides obvious trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to hopefully limit the amount of warming and limit the amount of flooding. But I mean, we're already on that path. So what can we do now to try and better prepare for flooding events? Do you think, what can be done now so that when these extreme flooding events, whether it's from a tropical cyclone or more of just a severe thunderstorm event, what can we do now to be better prepared for when these events occur?
Right. So before answering that question, I do want to get to something that you mentioned, which is like what the areas that could get flooded by tropical cyclones that maybe they don't get flooded today or did not get flooded several years ago, right? Like another factor that is influencing how much rainfall we get from tropical cyclones is that tropical cyclones may be stronger at landfall, which means that they can remain as a tropical cyclone, whether it's a hurricane or a tropical storm as they like lift northwards when they make landfall, for example, somewhere along the Gulf states. And we saw that, for example, a year ago when we saw a tropical cyclone making landfall and then bringing flooding all along the Mississippi River Basin, but also across the Northeast and all the way to New York. So we may see also, unfortunately, not only more flooding associated with tropical cyclones where we see it now, but also farther inland. So returning to your question then, what can we do? And there are some like actions that can be made at a city or county or state levels, right? So the way we build our communities is one example, right? Making sure that our communities have proper drainage and making sure that we build the new communities, if we're building new communities, right, that we build them in places that are not prone to flash floods. And for the places that do exist already that we cannot do so much about, then it becomes a question of like rethinking that infrastructure and preparing ourselves for the likely occurrence of flooding in our communities. But those are very big actions that I know that the listener is thinking out there, like, how can I at the personal level do that? And this is where organizations like the one that I'm part of, Science Moms, come in, because we know that a lot of people are concerned about climate change. We know that a lot of people are concerned about the consequences of climate change, for example, increasing flash flooding, but a lot of people don't know what to do. And organizations like Science Moms, which we will talk about in a minute, can help us to pinpoint at small actions that we can take that can make a big impact at a community and state and even country level.
Yeah, tell us more about what you do with Science Moms. What is it in the start? What is the goal of the organization?
Sure. So Science Moms is a nonpartisan organization that was established by people like me, who are not only scientists, but also happens to be moms. And like any mom out there, we're very, very concerned about the well-being of our children. And so moms are especially concerned about climate change in particular, and how climate change may impact the lives of our children as they grow up. So we got together, and our common goal is to educate and share tips with other moms about what can they do to tackle climate change, what can they do to inspire action, not only within like our households, but also within our communities and bigger communities such as our states and countries.
So with Science Moms, right? If you're a mom who is interested, could they speak with you directly, or is this going through? How is the communication between other moms and yourself and the other people who are part of the group at the foundation level? How can you guys speak?
So there are several ways to be able to do that. The first and most effective way is to go to sciencemoms.com. And right there, we have not only the information of like the Science Moms, those scientists like me who are a part of this effort, but also we have a lot of content, that videos and other content, list of books to read to children if we want to educate them about climate change, and other content that is dedicated to educate other moms, to inform other moms and parents and anyone really out there. We're just targeting moms because we're especially concerned about climate change. But going to sciencemoms.com is a first step. Right there, we have a lot of like easy to digest concept, some videos with some humor, some videos with other emotions, but all of it with the common goal of breaking down the science of climate change into small, digestible pieces that are meant to educate, to tell us what is going on, but also to tell us what to do. And for example, we have come up with a to-do list of 3 S's, which is swap, share, and speak up. And the swap meaning swapping polluting stuff for clean stuff, or in other words, swapping our CO2 producing cars, electricity, etc., for cleaner sources. Share, which is super important because that's one of the most important things that we need to do. Share the facts, share the concerns, and also the solutions for what we can do in terms of climate change. One of the biggest roadblocks when it comes to doing something about climate change is that we don't talk enough about it. And so that's where the second S from our to-do list comes in, sharing, talking about it, not only between ourselves, but also to other parents, to other members of our communities. And the third S, which stands for speak up, is speaking up and asking our leaders about their plans to stop big polluters. Because when it comes to climate change is not a me problem, it's an us problem. So we need real big actions. And that's where the third S comes in of speaking up. And so speaking up can be very daunting. I admit it completely. And something else that people can do with sciencemoms.com is that they can go there and there's already a letter formatted with everything that you need to send that letter to your representatives and other leaders, asking them to make action. So that's the gist of like sciencemoms.com and what we have up there, but they can definitely reach out to us. There are ways to reach out to us that are mentioned in the website. There is our social media accounts. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. And of course, they can reach out to each of us, one of the Science Moms.
Sciencemoms.com is the website, and I'm going here right now. It says find a group, and looks like there's like it looks like a 5-step process asking you where you're located. Does political ideology matter to you? Do you have school-age children? Were those questions that you were involved in crafting? And how many groups are there across the country?
Right. I don't have the full number at the top of my list. This is an increasingly growing initiative. But that initiative came up because we started getting so many questions, and Science Moms, when it started, we didn't expect to get the level of interest that we got, which tells you about how people are concerned and wanting to take action when it comes to climate change. So the communities that are being established through Science Moms are intended to bring those moms together and inspire them to take action. So it's a growing initiative, and I definitely encourage moms out there to check it out. And if there is not a group in their community, try to establish one.
And I think it's growing just because more and more people are being impacted by these extreme weather events that we're seeing, and one of them being flooding. I mean, there's just been so much of it lately. Folks, more and more people are being impacted about it. And the whole idea, you're coming back to those 3 S's: swap, share, and speak up. I think the share part is real easy right now. I mean, just the number of headlines going out, it's one after another with these flooding events lately. And other extreme weather as well, whether it's the record-breaking heat or the number of severe storms that we're seeing, just more and more people are being impacted by this. We're getting more and more extreme. So I think, there's just more and more people that are like, wow, this is not just one of those things that's impacting other people. This is impacting me now. More and more people are having their lives. I mean, just some of the images from some of these extreme flooding events, like the Eastern Kentucky stuff in particular stands out to me. I mean, just people's lives just completely uprooted. I mean, totally turned around. I mean, and unfortunately, one of the limitations, I think, right now. They're all the headlines initially when the event occurs and you see all the crazy images of the flooding. But when the water recedes, yeah, there's an initial round of people going around taking pictures. But then I think sometimes we often forget about those people and how long it takes to recover from a real extreme flooding event. I mean, when people just have completely lost their home, I mean, how do you rebuild from that? So, that's why I think the Science Moms initiative is so good, because nobody wants to have to go through that. And we're just seeing more and more people who are. And I think a lot of people want to know what they can do to try and avoid that. So, what's the best thing that people can do? Something quick and easy, because, they're always, of course, reaching out, and we need political action as well. But what's something that people can do on their own that can help to reduce the amount of these extreme flood events, that can help to limit global warming?
Going back to first what you were mentioning about like sharing and seeing how these events are happening, I would like to speak up very quickly about like one of the most common myths out there is that, oh, climate change is not going to impact me. It's something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that's going to impact the future generation. So that's something for them to figure out. But the truth is that no, it's happening. Like climate change is real and it's already happening. And it's mostly happening because we have put a pollution blanket out there essentially in the atmosphere. And that's essentially like warming up the atmosphere. And we're seeing the effects, unfortunately, by the many flooding events that we've seen like recently, that we may see in the future, but also all the other weather events that you saw. When it comes to action, what's the single most important action that we can take? That's a really, really like tough question. And I think when it comes to climate change, something to understand is that our climate is happening, our climate is changing because there is that pollution blanket out there. And that pollution blanket is due to the emissions of CO2 and other polluting gases. So the single most important action I think we can take is really speak up to our leaders to try to find better ways for us to transition into a cleaner energy. That means swapping like gas operating cars, but for electric cars. I did that myself, and I'm very fortunate that I live in a state that provides incentives for that. But I also understand that not every single person out there can do that. My parents can't do that. They don't have even the facilities at their home to do that. But if we as a community, if our government leaders can come up with the measures to change, to accelerate that transition towards more cleaner energy, that's something that really can help us truly have an effect and an impact on slowing down that pollution blanket, on slowing down that warming trend. So switching to cleaner energy, doing things that will result into cleaner air, whether it is biking to work, walking to work, all of those actions do make a change, but in the end, to make a real big change, we need to see those changes in the energy sources happening at a much, much broad scale than just the individual level.
Yeah, and that's why we all need to speak up and get vocal. And if you want to see change made, let people know, and especially the ones right at the highest level, that you want those changes made.
Yes, because really quick, something I like to mention is that the tools are there. There are electric vehicles. There are like ways to produce energy with solar panels, etc. There are many other tools out there. Unfortunately, the cost is a big burden. So that's where we need to speak up and try to find ways to make that affordable and accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest frustration now. We do have solutions. We know what we can do, and it's just getting started, getting the ball rolling. And so I think with organizations like Science Moms, we are starting that process. So I think sciencemoms.com, we want people to go there. But also, what's the best way for people to contact you if they have specific questions for you after listening to our discussion today?
They can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is RosimarWX, and they can find me out there and contact me. I'd be very, very happy to get in touch with other people.
Yes, the weather Twitter world. I think every meteorologist is on Twitter. That's where we particularly like to hang out. Of course, lots of social media, but I think weather has found its niche on Twitter in particular. So be sure to follow Rosimar on Twitter. And of course, check out sciencemoms.com. Well, Rosimar, this has just been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast again today. We'd love to have you back. I'm sure there will be more flooding events and more things to talk about. And of course, talking about Science Moms as well, and any changes or new initiatives that Science Moms is starting. If there's something going on there, we'd love to have you back.
Thank you very much. This is very important initiative to get this information to your listeners and to everybody out there. So thank you very much. And of course, I'd love to be back.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, we're going to take one more quick break. But then Joe and I will be back to share our final thoughts and wrap things up. So don't go anywhere. Across the sky. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Before we wrap up, here's NASA Ambassador Tony Rice with this week's astronomy report.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
We're going back to the moon. And the first step is set to begin on Monday, August 29th, when the 2-hour launch window for the Artemis 1 mission opens at 8:33 a.m. Eastern. This is a 42-day test flight, which will bring an uncrewed Orion capsule into distant retrograde orbit around the moon. This is to test out systems and procedures ahead of the Artemis 2 mission, which will include astronauts. The SLS rocket is sitting on the launch pad right now, so keep an eye out for launch weather forecasts in the coming days from the 45th Weather Squadron at Cape Canaveral. This is Florida in August, after all. That morning, one of the go-no-go calls that will be made is from the weather officer. They're going to consider several factors. The launch will be held if temperatures fall below 41.4 degrees Fahrenheit or stay above 94.5. They'll also be watching thresholds that are adjustable based on wind and humidity. It's also a no-go if winds top 29 knots at 40 meters or 39 knots at 80. They'll not be launching through any precipitation either. Like most launches, most of the criteria focuses on lightning. No lightning-producing thunderstorms or attached anvil clouds are allowed within 10 nautical miles of the flight path. Clouds attached to a smoke plume are also a problem. These are just some of the nearly 20 launch weather criteria that will be used that morning. They're detailed in the Artemis 1 press kit. The 45th Weather Squadron will also begin publishing their forecast in the days before launch at patrick.spaceforce.mil. Elsewhere in the sky, this week and next are a good time to spot Mercury. It's at its greatest elongation or separation in the sky from the sun, making it a lot easier to see. Look low along the western horizon after sunset. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Spring is here. That means it's time to get out and get on the road in my all-new 2023 Honda CR-V Hybrid. You heard right. The Honda CR-V is available in a hybrid model. I'm pretty excited about this. I've been waiting for the right time to make the switch to a hybrid, and I'm so glad I did. Not only am I greener, I can take on any terrain with the available real-time all-wheel drive and sport mode. Make a move to one of the most electrifying Honda vehicles yet. Find your CR-V Hybrid at your local Honda dealer today.
Thanks, Tony. Before the break, we finished up a great interview with Dr. Rosimar Rios-Berrios. We covered all things flooding and learned what's going on with the Science Moms. So, Joe, what stood out to you from our conversation?
Yeah, I liked how she is always focused on relating this flooding to the public and how we can communicate it as well. She said she's a numbers person, and I think many of us are if you're a meteorologist. But that's what stuck out to me too. And also, and we talked about this in the podcast. It's just interesting, and this isn't her. It's more of maybe a weather meteorological thing. How you go into college. You think you want to forecast because that's really all you're familiar with. And then you find new things as you explore, what's out there during college. And, I think we as a weather enterprise, maybe we need to do a better job of, telling people in middle school and high school what else you can do in meteorology. Of course, I think we all do talks with schools and we'll say what else you can do. But we're only so many people. We don't get to the whole world. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting as well. But Matt, I think you did a nice job, heading this off and steering us through. It's a 2-man show. And I think you did a good job. I think you did a great job.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe. Yeah, I thought it was, a real interesting discussion. And it truly is, pretty amazing how we just do not go very long now between these flooding events. And you feel, St. Louis was a great example. They had the really big flooding event, but then just about a week later, they had another significant flooding event. It wasn't quite at the level of the first one, but I mean, it was not very long after that there was even more. So, we're not just talking about another part of the country, but sometimes in the same location. When I was in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, in back-to-back years, we had these huge flood events.
Yeah.
Again, it was something that was supposed to be like a 1 in 500 year event, and it happened in back-to-back years, in the same location, and that's what's kind of, a little bit scary when, you see how people's lives can be just so uprooted and the amount of damage. I mean, the power of water, you cannot underestimate the power of water. When you see the images, you just realize, you just kind of see water flowing in a river and you just don't think much of it. But when you see when it flows in places where it normally doesn't flow and what it does, I mean, the images that we've seen in just the last couple months have just been truly incredible.
Yeah. Cool.
So, that's why, it's great that there's the Science Moms initiative out there and that organization trying to get the information out and trying to explain climate change, because we are definitely seeing the impacts of it right now. And so the more we understand it, the better. And we can get prepared for the future.
Communication's key. And, we, when it comes to climate change, we have been experiencing climate change at a pace, we haven't seen before. And I say this all the time when I do talks. It's been warmer than it's been now. It's been colder than it's been now. But the rate of change is really something that is the human element in this. I mean, really, you need either a human element of a massive volcano eruption or an asteroid, that's really going to, in a rapid, remember, the Earth's billions of years old. 10 years is nothing, but to have that kind of change, that's really what you need, and we're in one of those times. So, it's not, I don't think it's my job to say what we should or shouldn't do about it, but it is our job to present the facts and talk about what projections are, as we go into the future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the speed. I mean, we're seeing it happening now, but just the frequency of these events, and like it's time to start adapting now and getting prepared for the next one, because it's probably not going to be long before the next big event occurs.
Yeah.
So with that, I think that's another episode of Across the Sky in the books.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to be back next week with a special episode. So Sean, Kirsten, Joe, and I have all been invited to be on another podcast called Weather Brains. Sure, if our audience may or may not have heard of Weather Brains, but it's another weather podcast out there, and they reached out to us and wanted to bring us on their podcast. So we were like, sure, sounds good. So we're going to be talking, I think, all things weather. And I think they really want to talk about what we're doing kind of in the digital meteorology realm as well, kind of taking an all digital approach. And some of us with a TV background, but now just making the transition to digital. So I'm really looking forward to getting on their podcast and chatting with them.
Weather Brains, I at least the way I see it, was the first big weather podcast out there. I mean, they've been doing it since before podcasts were cool. So I take it as an honor to be with everybody there on Monday the 29th, and we'll have that episode out for you, the following week here. So I'm looking forward to it. Matt, we'll have the whole gang together too for that one. So that's been a rarity this summer. But I think as we get into the fall, I think we'll have the four of us together more and more.
Yeah, I think we must be doing something right if they asked us to be on Weather Brains, kind of one of the OGs in the weather podcasting world. It's like, hey, we must be doing something right. So
we are.
I'm definitely looking forward to that. And yes, having all the four of us together, and hopefully four of us on more episodes going forward here.
For sure.
And we're going to release that episode on Labor Day. So our recording with Weather Brains is going to be released as our episode on Labor Day. And then we'll have get back to our normal schedule after that. Yeah. And right now is also a good opportunity before the next episode comes out to go back and listen to some of our previous episodes of Across the Sky. We've covered a lot of interesting topics over the last few months. We're racking up the episodes. So, be sure to go back and listen to some of our, if you're new to the podcast, go back and check out some of the old episodes. Really good stuff on there. And if there's something you would like to hear us discuss, a topic for the podcast, let us know. Reach out to us on Facebook, on Twitter. Search for Joe and I, Kirsten, Sean. If there's a topic that you would like to hear us discuss on here, we are open to ideas. We'll come up with something. But if there's something you want to hear, give us an idea and we'll probably do it.
And I think we'd be remiss without saying, if not for the listeners, we wouldn't be on Weather Brains, because one of our listeners talked to Weather Brains and said, hey, you guys should have them on. So we appreciate everybody tuning in each and every Monday. And, good episode here, Matt. And we'll look forward to talking to everybody next week.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we appreciate everyone who's been following us and maybe is new to the podcast. So we'll be back again next week. But to wrap things up, for Lee Enterprises and Joe Martucci in Atlantic City, I'm Matt Holliner in Chicago. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care, and we'll catch you again soon.